Well, you Bitcoin fans, we got the tariffs, no tariffs deal right now. So while we're driving, we're going to talk about, like, are the tariffs muted or are they back, and what's the deal? What are my expectations? And what's going to happen to Bitcoin and crypto while this is going on? So, the International Court of Trade, 3-judge panel, 1 Trump judge, 1 Reagan judge, and 1 Obama judge, ruled unanimously, I think 3-0, that Trump's tariffs are unconstitutional. You might be asking me, well, doesn't the president have sole power to impose tariffs? No. Constitutionally, only Congress has the power to impose tariffs. Now, Congress can delegate those duties to the president, but Congress has not delegated the power to the president to impose unilateral tariffs on whatever country he wants. So he is stretching his power. Now, he's saying that there's a national emergency, so he has emergency powers. But the problem with that is you can't just declare an emergency whenever you want to assume emergency powers. And even emergency powers have their limits. Like, you can't just slap random tariffs on every country. And plus, we don't really have what constitutes a national emergency. You can be like, oh, but the situation at the border is a national emergency. Okay, but that basically has nothing to do with tariffs. That's mostly like an immigration thing. So that actually doesn't give him the power to just randomly slap tariffs on everything. You can't just be like, oh, we have a trade deficit with this country, so therefore it's a national emergency. That's just not going to fly. And the courts did rule that even under national emergency situations, he doesn't have nearly as much power as he wants to believe that he does. The president is a president. He is not a king. He is not a czar. He is not a supreme dictator. He can't just do whatever he wants. And for those of you complaining about activist judges, remember there's 2 conservative judges and 1 liberal judge on that court, and they voted 3-0. So the thing is, he is extending his authority, and his basic strategy ever since he's gotten into office is to extend his authority as much as possible without people calling him out on it. And the courts have started to call him out on it. And by the way, that's actually the court's constitutional job, to rein in both Congress and the president if they're being unconstitutional or trying to extend their powers way too far. And that's what Marbury versus Madison established, the ability of judicial review. If you don't know about that, read it up in history. It's part of, like, I think every middle school or high school history class, but if you weren't paying attention, then you should go reread on it. The courts are acting within the bounds of their own power. And it is the president right now that's trying to overstretch his power more than any other president, maybe since Abraham Lincoln, but we were actually in a civil war then, and we aren't in a war right now. And no, the president can't just be like, we're at war with someone. Only Congress has the power to actually declare war. So he is really stretching his power. So I actually expect the appeals court to actually uphold the circuit court's ruling because they go by the letter of the Constitution. He is definitely stretching his power far beyond the powers that a regular president should actually have, which is, by the ways, realistically, why no other president before him has actually tried to impose such sweeping tariffs. Also, his understanding of trade is like completely nonsense, because just because we have a trade deficit with someone does not mean they're actually tariffing us. That just means that we're just buying more stuff from them than they buy from us. And some of the smaller countries essentially can't really buy anything from us anyways because it's just too expensive for them. They can't afford our stuff, and we need, like, you know, certain things from them. So we have a trade deficit with them. For instance, I've talked about this before, Madagascar, they export, I believe, vanilla to us, but Madagascar is also extremely poor, so their people don't really want anything that we have, or they can't afford it, so we don't really export anything to them, but we import vanilla from them, and therefore we have a trade deficit, and it makes like 0 cents to actually tariff them, because that just makes vanilla more expensive for us, essentially. So I do expect the appeals court to actually uphold the circuit court's ruling, and I'm thinking he's going to appeal to the Supreme Court, but I think he might actually lose the Supreme Court ruling as well, even though the Supreme Court is slated 6 conservative judges to 3 liberal judges. All the other judges besides Alito and Thomas are not rubber stamps for Donald Trump. Amy Coney Barrett has actually broken a couple of times to vote for the liberal judges. Brett Kavanaugh has broken, obviously, to vote with liberal judges multiple times. And especially like Roberts, the Chief Justice, he's kind of just getting pissed off at Trump right now for bringing up like ridiculous lawsuits that really don't have any merit. And a lot of judges, not the Supreme Court themselves, but a lot of lower courts are issuing him scathing reviews because the stuff that some of the executive orders, especially those targeting individual law firms, are ridiculous. And his team's not actually appealing those cases because when they get ruled, because they know they're not really going to win, and it's just going to make them look bad if they try to appeal those cases to get more scathing reviews. And in those cases, like the Supreme Court most likely is not going to accept those cases anyways, so they know that they kind of just like completely lost those cases. But the statistic right now is that for the people that actually do stand up to him and that he gets a law case brought up to for circuit court, him and his team is losing 94% of those cases. And you might say, oh, those are liberal judges. Okay, fine. But even when they're brought up against a Republican or a Trump-appointed judge, he's losing 72% of the time. So he's not like actually faring too much better, a little better, but not too much better when the cases get brought up in front of one of the judges that he appointed. So that just goes to show you that how much he's trying to extend the powers of the presidency beyond what they are. And since we're not in a civil war and we're not in World War II or something, he can't actually do that at this point. So there is a temporary pause on the circuit court's injunction. So the tariffs are still on right now, but it's not like the tariffs are going to be on throughout the entire appeals process. The plaintiff, which is the businesses and a couple of attorney generals from states, actually have about a week to respond to this trade halt right now, and then the U.S. government, which is Donald Trump and White House and co., have another week to respond, and I think the deadline for all of that is June 9th. And then they'll hear the arguments from both sides, and then the appeals court will decide the case. So my guess is that until June 9th at least, we'll still have the tariffs, but after June 9th, we might be tariff-free. Now, that's not all the tariffs. They only block the overall broad-based tariffs, like the 30% on China, the 10% on the rest of the world. They did not block the auto, steel, and aluminum tariffs, which means the courts actually do think that he has the jurisdiction and the power to impose those kind of sectional tariffs. But having the broad-based overall tariffs basically repealed, hopefully, actually gives us a lot of relief. Now, if he appeals up to the Supreme Court, and they have to hear all of this, and they take the case, and I think they actually will take this case. I still kind of expect him to lose 5-4 over there, because I do think Roberts will actually side with the liberal justices, and I think either one of Kavanaugh, Bray, or the other person will also side with the liberal justices as well, because this is constitutionally, this is a huge extension of his power. And I don't think the current condition in terms of trade actually justifies any kind of emergency movement by the president himself. So him and his team have said if we lose this case, then we will find other ways to tariff, which might also be unconstitutional. So we're going to be stuck in this uncertainty for a while. But however, if Trump does actually lose this case, I do expect the market to go up. If you guys haven't noticed, the S&P futures pumped 600 points yesterday when the courts actually ruled that the tariffs were unconstitutional. Then they went back up to only to a plus 100 once the appellate court issued a stay on the nullification of Trump's tariffs. But I do believe the appellate court will actually rule just like the circuit court. And when they do that, I think the markets will rebound, and I think crypto will rebound as well. And I do think crypto does get a double benefit from this, because without the tariffs, I do expect rate cuts to become faster. Why do I say that? Well, it's because people, when they see these tariffs, they think they will drive up the price of items right now. And the Fed is kind of expecting that too. So they're holding back on rate cuts to see what effects the tariff have on prices. Without the tariffs, people don't really have the fear that the prices are going to go up massively. And because of that, there's not the uncertainty. And without the uncertainty and inflation coming down and all that stuff, the Fed's much more likely to cut interest rates. So essentially, right now, I think it's the tariffs that are holding up the interest rate cuts. I don't know if Trump's plan was to force the Fed to cut interest rates because with the tariffs, but I think it's actually having the opposite effect like most people would actually expect. So I actually do expect for those of us in crypto market and even the stock market that this is actually a good deal, but it might take a couple of weeks or a couple of months for the courts to actually hear the appeal and make a decision. And hopefully the courts kind of neuter Trump in his power grab and say these tariffs are unconstitutional, because I think that will have a big psychological effect on other things that he can try to assume with the powers of the presidency. But more than that, having basically neutering his tariffs will actually make the markets go up. And I think it's going to help altcoins even more than Bitcoin. And that's because altcoins rely more on consumer sentiment and retail FOMOing than Bitcoin. Bitcoin has buyers. We've discussed this before. There's a lot of institutional buyers buying Bitcoin, but altcoins do not have institutional buyers like that. So they actually need retail investors to come in, and retail investors aren't going to come in if they don't think the economy is good. So I think they're more likely to think that the economy is doing okay, doing well, if there's no tariffs, because there's less uncertainty. So I actually think this is a good move for us by the courts, at least those of us that are actually invested in crypto. And I think it will boost both Bitcoin and the altcoins if the tariffs get reversed by the court. And yes, the courts do have the power to actually do that. And technically, as it's always been, broad-based tariffs like this should only be and can only be instituted by Congress and cannot be instituted by President via executive order. And that's what the courts are ruling right now. So that's what I have to say for right now. Like and subscribe, hit the bell notifications button. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you guys later.